Stripped of his royal titles, evicted from his home on the grounds of Windsor Castle, former Prince Andrew was arrested by the police. He spent hours in custody, suspected of misconduct in public office because of his close association with convicted offender Jeffrey Epstein.
6 unmarked police cars, 8 in the morning, and the man inside the farmhouse had no idea that the last thread holding his life together was about to be cut. February 19th, 2026, his 66th birthday. For Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, until recently styled His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, Duke of York, birthdays had not been good to him for years, but none had ever been quite like this one. The cars belonged to Thames Valley Police, who had driven over 100 miles north into a different force's jurisdiction to find him. Police forces don't cross county lines on a Tuesday morning without a very specific reason. They had one. Andrew was taken roughly 50 miles to Aylsham Police Station, held and questioned for approximately 11 hours, then released under investigation, which in British law means neither charged nor cleared. The case remains active. The maximum sentence for the offense he was arrested under is life imprisonment. He returned to Wood Farm Cottage that night, slouched in the back of an unmarked car, photographed through the window by a press pack that had been waiting on the road since sunrise. This was the first arrest of a member of the British royal family in living memory. Some historians argue the right word is centuries. Either way, the point lands the same: the quiet, collective assumption that the law would simply never be required of a royal, shattered on a Tuesday morning in Norfolk. But here's what most headlines buried. The officers on his driveway weren't there because of anything the world had been arguing about for 15 years. Not the Newsnight interview, not the photographs, not the civil settlements. They were there because of emails almost nobody had heard of 2 weeks earlier. Emails about trade. Stay with me. We are just getting started. Section 2. The fall before the arrest. To understand the morning of February 19th, you need to understand the months that came before it. Because Andrew didn't just wake up one day and get arrested out of nowhere. His world had been dismantled piece by piece in public.
The humiliating punishment may not be the end of Andrew's problems.
On a published timeline starting the previous October. But first, where exactly was he living when those cars pulled up? Wood Farm Cottage sits at the edge of the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, privately owned by King Charles. Andrew had been quietly moved there in early February 2026, described officially as a temporary measure, while another farmhouse on the same estate was being prepared for him. But read the subtext. This was a man who had, until recently, been living in Royal Lodge, a 30-bedroom mansion at Windsor, on a 75-year lease he signed in 2003. He paid £1 million up front for it. And after that, the terms of the lease required what British property law calls a peppercorn rent. 1 peppercorn per year, if demanded, which is to say, nothing. He had been living in a 30-bedroom crown mansion, effectively for free, for over 2 decades, a lease meant to run until 2078. That lease was quietly ended around him. He was now living at his family's discretion in a farmhouse on their private estate, in a county 100 miles from where he had spent most of his adult life.
And will move to a modest cottage on King Charles's private estate 100 miles north of London.
And the family had been visibly, deliberately putting physical distance between him and the institution he had embarrassed. But why then? Why October 2025? What broke the dam? The book that changed everything. Her name was Virginia Giuffre, and she had been trying to tell the world about Andrew for nearly 15 years. She had filed civil lawsuits. She had given depositions.
He told his police bodyguards to gather dirt on Virginia.
She had appeared in legal filings that described, in stripped-back legal language, what she said had happened to her. She had been paid settlements. She had been sued. She had been photographed. She had been disbelieved. She had been dismissed, questioned, and dragged through more media cycles than most people could survive. And then she died. On April 2025, Virginia Giuffre died by suicide on a farm in Western Australia. She was 41 years old. 3 weeks before she died, she sent an email to her journalist collaborator, Amy Wallace, and to her publicist. The email did the work of a will. It said, "If anything happens to me, publish the book regardless. The content of it matters more than my presence to introduce it." The book was called Nobody's Girl, It was published on October 21, 2025, 6 months after her death, exactly as she had asked. What Nobody's Girl describes is harder to sit with than a legal filing, because a legal filing strips language down to what can be proven in court. A book lets a person speak the way a person who actually lived through something speaks. Virginia Giuffre was no longer alive to be intimidated, sued, pressured into silence, or paid to walk away, and she had made sure the words came out anyway. She wrote about 3 separate sexual encounters with Andrew. The first in London, in March of 2001. She was 17 years old. She described being woken that morning by Ghislaine Maxwell, who told her she was going to meet a handsome young royal that day. With the air, she wrote, of someone telling a small child she was being taken somewhere special. She wrote that she did not fully understand at the time what was happening to her. The third encounter she described took place on Epstein's private island. It involved Epstein, Andrew, and approximately 8 other young girls.
But her memoir detailing her relationship with Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein went on sale this month.
Most appeared to be under 18. Most did not speak much English. Ask yourself this: how many times had we been told this was simply an unfortunate social acquaintance? How many times did the palace describe it as nothing more than a friendship that, in hindsight, he wished he had ended sooner? How does that framing hold up against what she wrote? It doesn't. The emails inside the book. The book didn't just contain Virginia Giuffre's testimony, it pulled other evidence into the open. Within a week of publication, British newspapers reported that Andrew had emailed his Metropolitan Police Protection Officer in February 2011, hours before a photograph of him with Giuffre was about to appear in a Sunday newspaper. In that email, he passed along her date of birth and her American Social Security number, apparently asking the officer to look into her. Let that settle. A man whose official position was under threat by a woman coming forward took the personal identifying information of that woman, a trafficking survivor, and passed it to a serving police officer. The Metropolitan Police is now investigating that as a separate matter. Then there was a second leaked email from the same period. This one showed Andrew writing to Jeffrey Epstein in February of 2011, telling him that the two of them were in this together and would have to find a way through it. That email was sent 8 weeks after the December 2010 walk in Central Park. You may remember the Central Park walk. It was the moment Andrew told the BBC Newsnight interviewer, in that catastrophic interview, was the clean break, the final contact, the end of the friendship. He had gone to New York to end it in person, he said, because it was the honorable thing to do. He was emailing Epstein about finding a way through it 8 weeks later. His entire 2019 defense had rested on that December date as proof that he had cut ties. The emails prove it was a lie. Virginia Giuffre's family released a public statement after the book came out. They said Andrew had been brought down by her truth and her courage. They said she had done it for survivors everywhere. They said, as far as they were concerned, he had never been a prince in the first place. The institution moves. Here is something worth knowing about the British monarchy. It is almost never fast. Institutional caution is baked into every layer of how the crown operates. Decisions take months. Public statements go through rounds of internal sign-off. Moves against even the most disgraced figures are measured, incremental, cautious. What happened between October and December of 2025 was not that. 4 days before the book was published, on October 17th, Andrew issued a statement. He said that continued accusations had become a distraction from the work of his brother and the rest of the royal family. He said he would no longer use the title of Duke of York or the various honors that had been conferred on him. He maintained his denial of the underlying accusations. He had clearly been told that something was coming and that he had a narrow window to make a move that looked, however faintly, like it was his own choice. 13 days later, on October 30th, the palace announced that King Charles had initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew. He would from that point be known as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor.
He woke up a commoner, plain Mr. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor.
9 days. From the publication of a dead woman's memoir to a king formally stripping his own brother of titles he had held since birth. The modern British monarchy genuinely does not have muscle memory for that kind of speed. And then it kept going. November 3rd, letters patent under the Great Seal of the realm were issued by direct order of the king. They permanently revoked Andrew's right to hold the dignity of prince or the style of royal highness. The very mechanism used to create royal titles was run in reverse. In the official record of the British state, Andrew is no longer a prince in any legal sense whatsoever. The Dukedom of York was cancelled from the roll of peerage in the same period. December 2nd, the king issued separate directives cancelling Andrew's appointment as a Knight Companion of the Most Noble Order of the Garter, conferred in 2006, and his appointment as a Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order, conferred in 2011. His name was formally erased from the registers of both orders. The Order of the Garter dates back to 1348. It had been running continuously for 678 years before it had to physically remove a member from its own books. The member it had to remove was the son of a queen. Let that number sit with you. 678 years. What the arrest was actually about. Now we come to the part that most coverage got wrong, or at least incomplete. When Thames Valley Police announced in early February 2026 that they were assessing claims relating to the former prince's conduct in public office, the public largely assumed they were looking at the older allegations. The trafficking, the abuse, everything Giuffre had described. That was a reasonable assumption, given the timing. It was wrong. The police were working through a set of emails that had surfaced in a document trove released by the United States Justice Department in early 2026. As part of its long-running investigation of Jeffrey Epstein, the DOJ published more than 3 million pages of materials. Somewhere inside that mountain of paper, a handful of emails quietly rewrote the entire shape of the story. They were emails about trade from 2010 and 2011, and once they were read in sequence, they answered a question nobody had really been able to fully answer in 15 years. What was Jeffrey Epstein actually getting out of his friendship with a British prince? Andrew held the position of the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment from 2001 to 2011. He traveled on behalf of the British government, met with foreign businesses and officials, and reported back on commercial opportunities the British state might want to pursue. The role came with legal obligations. Trade envoys are bound by confidentiality requirements on sensitive commercial and political information. That obligation is reinforced by the Official Secrets Acts of 1911 and 1989. Every person who has held the role has signed paperwork acknowledging that. In November 2010, one of Andrew's special advisors, a man named Amir Patel, sent Andrew an email with 4 attached documents covering his recent official trips to Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Singapore, and Vietnam. Within 5 minutes of that email landing in his inbox, Andrew had forwarded the entire package, all 4 attachments still attached, to Jeffrey Epstein. 5 minutes. Internal trade reports from official British government visits going directly to the personal email of a man who had, by that point, been on the American Sex Offender Registry for 2 years. Stop here for a second, because I want you to think about what you would have to do to find yourself in a position where that felt acceptable, where you receive classified government trade documents and your first instinct, inside 5 minutes, is to forward them to a convicted offender who has no official role, no clearance, and no business receiving them. That is not an accident. That is a pattern of behavior. And it was exactly that, a pattern. The pattern. On Christmas Eve of the same year, while most of the country was wrapping presents and watching television, Andrew sent Epstein a separate document. Not an oversight, not a quick forward before he thought about it. Christmas Eve. This document was a confidential briefing prepared for him by the British Provincial Reconstruction Team in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. British troops were actively deployed in Helmand at the time. The briefing described what its authors called high-value commercial opportunities in Helmand, including identified deposits of gold, uranium, and other minerals. Andrew described the document in his own forwarding note as confidential. He sent it anyway. Read that again. He labeled the document confidential in the same email where he sent it to a convicted sex offender. He knew exactly what it was, and he sent it. 2 months later, he wrote to Epstein about a private equity firm he had recently visited. He mentioned that he had been thinking of Epstein during the meeting, because Epstein, on Andrew's own description in that email, was hunting for somewhere to put money. A man who had casually attended a few parties and stumbled into an unfortunate social acquaintance does not sit in a private equity meeting and mentally inventory which deals his friend, a convicted offender, might want to put money into. That is not what an innocent person's mind does. That is what a business partner's mind does. The minister who should have known about all of this? Vince Cable, who was the British business secretary at the time, the minister directly responsible for international trade. When the BBC reached out to Cable after these emails surfaced, his response was quietly devastating. The information about Afghan investment opportunities being passed around in that way was genuinely the first he was hearing of it. The minister responsible for trade was unaware that his trade envoy was running a parallel pipeline of confidential documents to the personal email of a convicted sex offender. This is the material the February arrest was built on. The charge and what it means. Misconduct in public office is one of the older and stranger offenses in British law. Prosecutors usually try to avoid it because it is genuinely difficult to prove. The offense requires establishing that a public official has willfully neglected their duty or willfully misconducted themselves to such a degree that it amounts to an abuse of the public's trust. The maximum sentence is life imprisonment. But here is the detail that really matters. To even open a formal investigation, the police had to be satisfied, based on the evidence in front of them, that a former prince of the United Kingdom was, in their professional assessment, a former public officer who might have committed a serious offense.
Andrew has always denied any wrongdoing and has not faced any criminal charges
in the conduct of his official role. That sentence alone is constitutionally extraordinary. The British state, through its police, formally assessed that a man born into the House of Windsor may have committed a crime while officially representing Her Majesty's government. That finding, on its own, would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. Today, it is sitting in active police paperwork, and there is a detail about the King's statement that morning that nobody should have walked past. Charles said the legal process had to be allowed to run its course. He said the family stood ready to fully cooperate. He said the news had reached him with the deepest concern. These are the expected things. But he did not, anywhere in that statement, refer to Andrew as his brother. He referred to him by no familial term at all. He distanced himself from the arrest through the official palace channels, but went further. He personally signed the statement rather than routing it through the press office, which is something the British monarch almost never does in public situations of this kind. The absence of the word brother was the loudest part of the entire morning. The things that haven't finished yet. Here's the uncomfortable part. We are not at the end of this story. We may not even be at the middle of it. The Metropolitan Police is separately assessing whether London's airports, including Heathrow, were used to facilitate the trafficking of Epstein's victims. This is not a hypothetical inquiry. It is an active police assessment. And the Met has publicly asked any current or former officer who provided protection to Andrew over the years to carefully consider whether they may have seen or heard anything relevant to the investigation. When the police publicly ask former bodyguards to carefully consider their memories, they are not making a polite request. They are warning people, and the men and women who used to stand outside Andrew's door will have heard that clearly. Then there is the United States Congress. In October of 2025, Congress wrote to Andrew asking him to testify about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. They asked him to respond by November 20th. He did not respond at all. The deadline came and went without any acknowledgement, without a statement, without a representative sent in his place. He simply chose not to engage. You and I wouldn't be permitted to make that choice. The British government has also been reported by multiple outlets to be considering legislation that would formally remove Andrew from the line of succession to the throne. He is currently still 8th in line. He is 8th in line to the throne to which he can no longer be referred to as a prince. He is 8th in line to a throne he will never sit on, in a family that no longer publicly acknowledges him as a brother, living in a farmhouse at his family's discretion on his family's private estate, under active police investigation for crimes he committed while officially representing the British Crown. That is not justice being served. That is not the end of something. That is the architecture of a man's entire life, collapsing one wall at a time. What 15 years got wrong? Let's be direct about this. For 15 years, the framing around Andrew was unfortunate friendship, bad judgment, wrong crowd, damage contained. Even his most vocal critics mostly kept the story in the social register. Questionable associates, inappropriate photographs, poor taste in companions. At worst, a willingness to look the other way about things a decent man would have distanced himself from faster. That framing was wrong. Not just incomplete, fundamentally wrong in its category. What the trade emails establish is that the Andrew Epstein relationship was not primarily social.
Andrew's relationship with Epstein has cast a scandalous shadow over the royal family for over a decade.
It was operational. Epstein was receiving government intelligence. He was receiving Afghan mineral surveys. He was receiving commercial briefings from official British trade visits. He was being mentally included in private equity deal flow by the man whose official role was to represent British commercial interests abroad. For a man who maintained in interview after interview that the friendship was nothing more than an unfortunate social acquaintance, the emails established something entirely different. Epstein was being treated as a business partner in everything but name, with access to materials that no one outside the government should have had. The question the public had never been able to answer, what was Epstein getting out of this friendship with a prince, now has a partial answer. He was getting information, confidential, official, classified information, from a man whose job required him to gather exactly that kind of material on behalf of the British state. And the next question, what Andrew was getting in return, remains formally unanswered. The investigation is active. The charges have not been brought. But it is no longer possible to look at this relationship as a social accident. A dead woman's words. There is a moral center to this story that the arrests and the emails and the institutional dismantling tend to push to the side, and we shouldn't let that happen. Virginia Giuffre was 17 years old in March of 2001. She was trafficked, she was abused, and she spent the better part of 20 years trying to be believed by institutions that had every structural incentive to dismiss her. Courts, media organizations, public narratives, the weight of royal prestige, the resources of wealthy men who could afford to outlast her in legal proceedings. She made sure her words would outlast her. 3 weeks before her death, she sent an email. She said, "If anything happens to me, publish the book. The content matters more than my presence to introduce it." She died, and the words came out, and the King of England stripped his own brother of titles dating back centuries within 9 days of those words becoming public. Think about what that means. Think about the weight of what she carried for 2 decades and what she had to do to be heard. She did not get to see Andrew arrested on his birthday. She did not get to see the Order of the Garter erase his name from its 678-year-old books. She did not get to see the 6 unmarked police cars pulling into the Norfolk farmhouse. She did not get to see any of it. Her family did. They said she had done it for survivors everywhere. I think that's right. And I think it is worth saying plainly. The constitutional rupture. There is a version of this story that focuses on the salacious, on the photographs and the sweating and the alibi and the Pizza Express in Woking. 15 years of commentary has mostly been told in that register. But the story that is actually unfolding in 2026 is a constitutional story, and it is one that the British state has never had to tell before. The assumption baked into the British constitutional settlement for centuries is that members of the royal family exist in a different relationship with the law than ordinary subjects. Not legally above it, technically, but functionally protected from it by the weight of deference, by the political awkwardness of prosecuting the monarchy's own members, by the quiet understanding that certain things simply would not happen. The law would not come for a prince, not in living memory, not in any memory most people had access to. That assumption is now formally broken. It broke not because a campaign forced it, not because a foreign government demanded it, not because the courts finally found a mechanism they had been denied before. It broke because the evidence became impossible to ignore. Because a woman spent 2 decades making sure it would be impossible to ignore. Because a document trove from a dead man's investigation landed in 2026 and contained emails that made the operational nature of the relationship visible to any investigator with the patience to read them in sequence. The mechanism broke because the evidence was too heavy to hold. What comes next? As of the time of this video, Andrew has been released under investigation. No charges have been formally brought. The Metropolitan Police are conducting a separate investigation into the police officer he asked to look into Giuffre. The DOJ document trove is still being worked through by multiple agencies on both sides of the Atlantic. The British government is considering legislation to formally remove him from the line of succession. Parliamentary discussions have reportedly begun about whether the current constitutional arrangements adequately handle a scenario like this one, because the honest answer is that they don't. The country currently has a man in the line of succession who has been stripped of his titles, his honors, his lease, and his name, but who remains, by an oversight the Constitution has not yet gotten around to fixing, the eighth person in line to the throne. Andrew has not spoken publicly since his arrest. He has made no statement. He has answered no questions. He has sent no representatives to Congress. He has not acknowledged Virginia Giuffre's book in any way that has been made public. He is, as far as the public record is concerned, silent. There is a version of this silence that looks like legal strategy. Say nothing. Cooperate with nothing. Give the investigation no additional material to work with. And there is a version of it that looks like a man who has spent 66 years operating on the assumption that silence and prestige and the weight of institutional protection would be enough to make problems disappear. That assumption failed him. The silence remains. The investigation does not. The cost of friendship. He still has his face. He still has his children. He is still, by a technicality the British Constitution hasn't gotten around to fixing yet, eighth in line to a throne he will never sit on. Everything else is either gone or going. No title, no honorary role, no royal lodge, no peerage, no garter membership, no protection from the apparatus of law enforcement, no king willing to call him brother in a public statement, no farmhouse of his own, just a farmhouse lent to him, temporarily, by the family that has spent 6 months formally erasing him from the national record. He lost it all for one reason. He couldn't stop being friends with a man who killed himself in a New York jail cell in August of 2019. And the reason that keeps recurring, in the emails, in the timelines, in the trade reports forwarded within 5 minutes, in the confidential Afghan mineral survey sent on Christmas Eve, is not that he was naive. It is not that he was poorly advised or socially reckless or insufficiently careful about optics. The reason, on the evidence the police are now formally working through, is that the friendship was never really what he said it was. It was operational. It was transactional. There was something flowing in both directions. And whatever Epstein had over Andrew, or whatever Andrew was getting from Epstein, it was sufficient to keep him forwarding classified government documents on Christmas Eve, mentally including a convicted offender in private equity meetings, and writing emails in February 2011 saying the two of them were in it together. We spent 15 years underestimating all of that, and every few months, the revised estimate goes up. If you made it this far, you already understand why this story matters beyond the tabloid register it has mostly been told in. This is a story about the limits of institutional protection, about what happens when the evidence becomes too heavy to contain, about a woman who made sure her words would survive her and who changed the course of constitutional history in doing so, about a man who had every advantage in the world: wealth, title, prestige, family, legal resources, decades of deference, and who used some of those advantages to protect something that did not deserve to be protected. The 6 unmarked cars arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning on his birthday. And the strangest thing about it, the thing that keeps coming back, is not that it happened, it is that it took this long. If this is the kind of deep dive you come here for, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Do you think Andrew will ever be formally charged? Or will the investigation run out of road before it gets there? I'll be reading every answer. I'll see you next time on Top Rewind.